The throne room at Buckingham Palace has witnessed centuries of history, coronations, abdications, state dinners, and whispered conversations that shaped the British monarchy. But on a rain-soaked Tuesday afternoon in November 2025, those ancient walls bore witness to something none of them could have prepared for. A son confronting his father about the mother they both lost. A king facing questions he'd spent decades avoiding. And a cache of letters that threatened to shatter everything the House of Windsor had worked so hard to rebuild. Prince William arrived without warning. No official appointment. No palace aides clearing the way. Just the future King of England, walking through the private corridors of his father's residence with a kind of purposeful stride that made palace staff scatter. His security detail was told to wait outside. His private secretary was dismissed at the gates. This was not a meeting of monarch and heir. This was a son who had finally decided to stop pretending. The letters had been discovered 3 weeks earlier, hidden in a trunk at Althorpe, the Spencer family estate, among Lady Diana's personal effects that had remained untouched since her death in 1997. Her sister, Lady Sarah McCorquodale, had been clearing out the attic when she found them. Dozens of letters written by Princess Diana in the final years of her life, never sent, never destroyed, never read by anyone until now. The contents were devastating. William had read them in the library at Kensington Palace, alone, his hands trembling as he turned each page. His mother's voice came back to him through ink and paper, raw and unfiltered, describing the isolation, the pain, the desperate loneliness of her final years. Letters addressed to people who never received them. Letters that contained names, dates, and accusations that had never been made public. Letters that would change everything. Now William sat in the private study of King Charles III, the rain lashing against the windows, the silence between them thick enough to choke on. His father had been reviewing state papers when William entered. He'd looked up with that familiar expression, surprise, pleasure, and something else William had learned to recognize: wariness. The look of a man who knew his son rarely visited without an agenda. "William," Charles said, setting down his glasses. "This is unexpected. I was told you were in Scotland." William didn't sit. He stood near the window, his back to his father, watching the rain streak down the glass. "I came back early. Something I needed to discuss with you." Charles's expression shifted. The practiced warmth of a monarch greeting his heir gave way to something more cautious. "I see. Well, sit down. Let's talk." William turned, and the look on his face made Charles pause. Whatever his son had come to discuss, it wasn't going to be pleasant. William crossed the room slowly, deliberately, and placed a stack of papers on the desk between them. The letters were yellowed with age, their paper soft and fragile. Charles's eyes widened when he recognized the handwriting. "Where did you get these?" Charles asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Althorpe. They've been there for 28 years. Aunt Sarah found them last month." William sat down across from his father, his expression unreadable. "I've been reading them. All of them. Some of them are addressed to you. Letters Mummy never sent." Charles's face had gone pale. He reached for the letters, then pulled his hand back as if they might burn him. "William, you shouldn't have read those. They were private. They were your mother's private thoughts. Private thoughts she never shared because she was afraid of how you'd react. Afraid of what you'd do. Afraid of your staff, your advisors, your people who made her life a living hell." William's voice was calm, controlled, but underneath it was something dangerous. "She wrote about the dinners where she sat alone while you had meetings. She wrote about the nights she cried herself to sleep because she couldn't bear the loneliness anymore. She wrote about the people you surrounded yourself with who made her feel like she was going insane." Charles's jaw tightened. "Your mother and I had a complicated relationship. That's not news to anyone." But those letters, they're one side of a story. There's always another side. Then tell me, William said, leaning forward. Tell me the other side. Explain to me why she felt so isolated that she wrote letters to dead relatives just to have someone to talk to. Explain to me why she was so terrified of your private secretary that she stopped using the telephone. Explain to me why she describes your staff as the jailers of my marriage. I'm listening, Father. Explain it to me. The silence stretched between them. Charles removed his glasses, rubbing his eyes in a gesture that had become more frequent with age. It wasn't simple. It was never simple with your mother. She was struggling long before I met her, William. She had eating disorders, emotional instability, a need for attention that I could never fully satisfy. I'm not blaming her. I loved her. I did. But the marriage was impossible from the start. No, William said, his voice hardening. That's not what these letters say. You can't rewrite history with psychology. She was young when she married you. She was isolated. She was trapped in a system she didn't understand. And instead of protecting her, you let the system swallow her whole. Charles's expression flickered with something that might have been guilt. I tried to protect her. I did what I could. But the palace. Always the palace. William laughed bitterly. It's always the palace with you. The institution, the crown, the system. You've been king for 3 years, and you're still making excuses. It wasn't the palace that had affairs, Father. It wasn't the palace that made my mother feel unloved. It was you. You did that. You and no one else. Charles sat back in his chair as if he'd been struck. The air between them was electric with decades of unspoken grief. William, I won't stand here and be berated in my own study. I'm your father. I'm your king. You will not speak to me this way. You're my father, William said, and I will speak to you however I need to speak to you. I'm doing this because I love you. Because if I don't say it now, I'll never say it. And I need to say it. I need you to hear it. William stood abruptly, pacing the length of the study. The family portraits on the walls seemed to watch them, ancestors who had witnessed centuries of royal drama. None of it quite like this. When William spoke again, his voice was softer, but no less intense. When she died, I was 15. 15 years old, and she was gone. I had to walk behind her coffin in front of the world. I had to grieve in public while cameras captured every tear. And I had to do it with you and everyone else telling me to be strong, to be brave, to be the future king. No one ever asked me what I needed. No one ever asked what I lost. I've spent my entire adult life trying to make sense of a woman I lost when I was a child. And now I have her letters and I finally understand the pain she was in, the loneliness, the absolute despair of being trapped in this family. William turned back to face his father, his eyes red. You're not my enemy, Father. I don't think you ever were. But you weren't her protector either. You were supposed to be her husband. You were supposed to love her, support her, stand up for her. And you let her drown. You let her drown in this family's expectations, this family's cruelty, this family's coldness. And when she died, you couldn't even grieve properly because you were already with Camilla. Charles's face crumpled. For a moment, the mask of the monarch slipped, and William saw his father, just a man, old and tired and carrying grief he'd never fully processed. I loved Diana. I loved her so much it hurt, but I couldn't save her. I couldn't save her from herself, from the media, from the institution. I couldn't save myself from the mess we'd made. There were days I hated myself for what we'd become, what I'd done to her. But I couldn't fix it. Some things can't be fixed. Then why am I still making the same mistakes? William asked, his voice cracking. I look at my own marriage, my own family, and I see the pattern. The pressure, the scrutiny, the expectation. I watched Catherine struggle with things my mother struggled with, the isolation, the constant attention, the loneliness of being in this family. And I wonder if I'm just repeating your mistakes. If I'm letting her drown the same way you let Mummy drown. Charles rose from his chair, moving toward his son with a sudden urgency.
No.
That's not true. William, look at me. That's not true. You married me to Catherine. You love Catherine. You support her. But you still don't see it. The system crushes everyone. Even the ones we love. Even the ones we're trying to protect. That's what Mummy's letters taught me. It's not about individual people failing each other. It's about a system that's built to destroy human connection. And I'm trapped inside it. We all are. Charles reached out, placing his hands on his son's shoulders. William, listen to me.
Please.
You and Catherine have something your mother and I never had. You have real love.
You have partnership.
You have a marriage that is built on something real. I know you feel the pressure. I know it's overwhelming sometimes. But you're not repeating my mistakes. You're doing better. You're doing so much better. Then why do I feel so lost? William whispered. Why do I read her letters and see myself in her pain? The rain continued to fall outside. The study was silent except for the ticking of a grandfather clock and the sound of two men breathing, one old, one young, both carrying the weight of a family that had never learned how to heal. Charles led his son to the leather sofa near the fireplace, his arm around William's shoulders. Let me tell you something I've never told anyone, Charles said softly. When your mother died, I was in France. I remember the exact moment I heard. It was 4 a.m., and I was asleep, and my private secretary called with the news. I couldn't speak. For a full minute, I couldn't make a sound. I just sat there, holding the phone, thinking about the last conversation I'd had with her. It was about you and Harry. She was worried about you boys. She asked me to take care of you, and I promised her I would. Did you? William asked, his voice hollow. Take care of us? I tried, Charles said, and there was something raw in his voice. I failed in so many ways. I was distant. I was distracted. I was consumed by my own needs. But I tried, and I kept trying, even when it felt impossible, even when you hated me, even when Harry stopped speaking to me. I kept trying because I loved her and I loved you boys, and I had to believe that somehow, someday, we'd find our way back to each other. William pulled away, looking at his father with something approaching pity. We're here now, but is it real? Or is it just because I'm the heir and you're the king, and we have to put on a show for everyone? It's real, Charles said. It's always been real. Even when it was hard, it was real. William shook his head slowly. I don't know if I can believe that. I don't know if I can trust it. You're so good at saying what people want to hear. You've had a lifetime of practice. But I need to know what's underneath. What's actually there? Charles met his son's gaze. What's underneath is guilt.
Pain.
Love. The fear that I've failed everyone I've ever cared about. The terror that I'll die before I can make things right with you and Harry. And the hope that maybe, just maybe, it's not too late. The confession hung in the air between them. William felt tears threatening to break through his carefully constructed composure. For years, he'd held himself together. The stoic prince, the dutiful son, the reliable heir. But here, with his father, he felt the facade starting to crack. The letters, William said finally. They talk about the things you did, the affairs, the coldness, the way you let her believe she was going insane. I can't unread that, Father. I can't pretend it doesn't exist. I'm not asking you to pretend, Charles said. I'm asking you to understand. To understand that I was drowning too. Not in the same way she was, but drowning nonetheless. We were two people who were fundamentally incompatible, who made promises we couldn't keep, who hurt each other in ways we couldn't control. And for that, I am deeply, profoundly sorry. I have been sorry every day for 30 years. Words are cheap, William said. You know that. You've used words your whole life to build walls, to create distance, to protect yourself. I need something else. I need to see it. I need to feel it, not just hear it. Charles was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. What would that look like? What do you need from me? William looked his father in the eye. I need you to stop being the king in here. Just for one conversation. I need you to be my father, not the monarch, not the head of state. Just the man who loved my mother and who failed her, and who is trying to make it right. I need you to be real with me. Not performative. Not diplomatic. Real. Charles sighed, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to drain the energy from his body. I don't know if I remember how to be real. I've been performing for 60 years. It's easier to put on a show than to take it off. I know, William said. I'm the same way, but we can't keep doing this. We can't keep being two people who are trapped in roles that were assigned to us before we were born. We have to break out of it somehow. We have to find a way to be human together. The rain was starting to ease. A sliver of pale sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air of the study. Charles and William sat in silence, the weight of everything they'd said pressing down on them. Harry, Charles said finally. He's been estranged from me for months. I don't know how to fix it. I don't know what to say to him that I haven't already said. William's expression softened slightly. Harry needs time. He needs to see that you're not going to hurt him again. And he needs to know that we, all of us, are genuinely trying to change. Not just saying we will. Actually doing it. And what about you? Charles asked. What do you need from me to heal? William was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he spoke. I need you to tell me the truth about Mummy. All of it. The good, the bad, the ugly. I need to know who she really was, not who the press told me she was. I need to understand why things fell apart between you. And I need to know that you loved her. That you really, truly loved her. Even when it was hard. Charles nodded slowly. I can do that. I can tell you the truth. But you have to understand, your mother was complicated. She was generous and thoughtful and fiercely loving. But she was also wounded, and her wounds made her difficult. She wasn't easy to love. But I loved her anyway. I loved her more than I've ever loved anyone except you boys. And that's the truth. William listened carefully, and for the first time, he allowed himself to believe it. I don't know if I'll ever fully understand her, but I want to try. I want to know her better. I want to know everything. There's something else, Charles said, his voice hesitant. Something I've never told anyone, not even Camilla. William looked up, his interest piqued. What is it? Charles reached into his desk, pulling out a small, worn photograph. This was taken at Balmoral, shortly before you were born. Your mother and I, in the gardens, when everything was still new and hopeful. I've kept this for over 40 years. It's proof, William. Proof that we had something real. Proof that I loved her. Proof that it wasn't all a lie. William took the photograph, studying it carefully. His mother looked so young, so happy. His father looked different too, younger, lighter, as if the weight of monarchy hadn't yet crushed him. They were smiling, truly smiling, in a way that William realized he'd rarely seen in pictures of them together. Keep it, Charles said softly. She would want you to have it. She always wanted you to know that there were good times. She didn't want you to remember the pain. She wanted you to remember that she loved you, that she loved all of us. William tucked the photograph into his pocket, a small gesture that felt incredibly significant. "Thank you, Father, for telling me the truth, for trusting me with this."
"You're my son," Charles said. "You're my heir."
"And more than that, you're the only person in the world who understands what it's like to be me. We share this burden, this terrible, wonderful, overwhelming burden. And I don't want to carry it alone anymore." "Neither do I," William admitted. "I've been pretending to be strong for so long. Pretending I have all the answers. Pretending I'm okay. But I'm not always okay."
And it's exhausting.
Charles reached out, taking his son's hand. "We're going to figure this out. Together. Not as king and heir. As father and son.
It won't be easy.
There will be setbacks. But we're going to do it." "Promise?" William asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I promise," Charles said. "On my mother's grave. On your mother's memory. On everything that matters to me. We're going to heal this family. Even if it takes the rest of my life." The rain had stopped completely now. The clouds were parting, and sunlight flooded the study. It felt like a sign, a moment of grace in a family that had experienced very little of it. William looked at his father and saw something he never fully recognized before. A man who was trying, who was doing the work, who was willing to admit that he'd failed and to try again. "These letters," Charles said, nodding toward the stack on his desk. "What are you going to do with them?" William considered the question carefully. "I'm going to show them to a few trusted advisors. To Catherine. Maybe to Harry, if he's ready. And then I'm going to put them back where I found them. Mummy didn't send them for a reason. I think she wanted to protect people. And I'm going to honor that." Charles nodded slowly. "That's wise. That's very wise." "But I'm not going to forget what I read," William added. "I'm never going to forget. And I'm going to make sure that your grandchildren know the truth about their grandmother. The full truth. Her struggles and her triumphs. Not the sanitized version that the palace likes to present." "That's all I've ever wanted," Charles said. "For her to be remembered as she actually was. Flawed and beautiful and human and brave. She was so brave, William. So much braver than people gave her credit for." "I know," William said. "I know she was." The two men sat in the study, the photographs and letters spread between them, and for the first time in years, they talked like family. They talked about Diana's love of dancing, her fierce protectiveness of her children, her laugh that could fill any room. They talked about the good times, the bad times, the moments of connection that had made the tragedy of the marriage bearable. William stayed until the evening shadows began to lengthen. When he finally stood to leave, Charles rose to walk him to the door. At the threshold, something passed between them, a shared acknowledgement that this conversation had changed something fundamental. "I'll see you at Christmas," William said. "Catherine's planning something special. The children are already excited." Charles smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I can't wait. I'll bring my holiday sweaters. Not the official ones. The ridiculous ones the grandchildren like." William laughed, surprising himself. "They'll love that. Especially the sweater with the pugs on it." That was a good choice. "It was, wasn't it?" Charles grinned. "Who knew that being a grandfather would be the most authentic role I'd ever play?" "The most authentic role any of us will ever play," William agreed. "Everything else is just performance." Charles clasped his son's shoulder, his expression turning serious. "Thank you for coming today. Thank you for being honest with me. I know it wasn't easy." "I needed to do it," William said. "We needed to do it. Things can't stay the same forever." "No," Charles agreed. "They can't. And maybe that's a good thing." William walked out of Buckingham Palace, the photograph of his parents in the Balmoral garden safe in his pocket, his heart lighter than it had been in years. Behind him, King Charles III stood in the doorway of his study, watching his son leave, and for the first time in decades, he felt something he'd almost forgotten existed: hope. The next morning, Prince William was spotted taking his children to school. He looked tired but relaxed, the photograph of his parents still tucked inside his jacket. His staff reported that he seemed different, more present, more engaged, more like himself. King Charles canceled his morning appointments, retreating to the gardens of Clarence's house for an hour of quiet reflection. Palace officials reported that he seemed unusually emotional, though they couldn't say why. He'd been seen holding something, a photograph, a letter, but no one dared ask. The letters were returned to Althorpe, where they would remain private indefinitely. William's team confirmed that the future king had no plans to make their contents public, despite offers from multiple media outlets. He's done his research, he's made his peace with it, and now he's moving forward, a senior aide explained. The letters are a private matter between him and his father. Period. Some called it a missed opportunity. Diana's fans, still passionate after nearly 3 decades, argued that the letters should be published so the world could understand what she truly endured. Others praised William for protecting his mother's privacy even in death. The controversy would likely continue, but for William and Charles, the matter was settled. That Christmas, the royal family gathered at Sandringham with a warmth that had been absent for years. Prince William sat next to his father, their shared history still complicated, but no longer so heavy. Prince Harry didn't attend, citing scheduling conflicts and ongoing tensions, but a source close to the Sussexes reported that the brothers had spoken privately the night before, and Harry had seemed more open to reconciliation. At the end of the evening, when the grandchildren were asleep and the adults were gathered by the fire, King Charles raised a glass. "To family," he said. "To the past that shaped us and the future that awaits us." "To family," William repeated, his eyes meeting his father's. "To understanding. To healing. To always moving forward." And somewhere, in the gardens of Althorpe, in the quiet of a November evening, the spirit of the people's princess smiled. Because finally, after all the pain, all the heartache, all the years of silence, her sons were talking. Her husband was listening. And the family she had longed to see healed was finally, slowly, mending itself. What do you think? Was William right to confront his father about Diana's secret letters? Should the letters be made public, or should they remain private? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video to help it reach more people. Subscribe to our channel for more explosive royal revelations.